So it's day 3 of the Human Rights Commission's hearings into discrimination and racism in the advertising industry. The Freedom of Expression Institute is one of the organizations set to give evidence today. Yesterday, Advertising Regulation Board CEO Gail Schimmel said racism is a problem in the sector. Malungelo Booi joins us ahead of those hearings in Rosebank. And Malu, welcome to studio. You've been tracking the hearings over the course of a week. That's a big admission made by Gail Schimmel.
It's interesting, Michelle. Perhaps let's go back to Monday when we heard the economic freedom fighters, Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, saying, in fact, that the advertising sector in its entirety should be fined about 50 billion rand, and half of that amount should go towards the SABC, and the remaining percentage should then go towards community media and black-owned media, because he's saying that his argument is that when you see black people in these adverts, it's either they're portrayed as criminals, and you don't see that on white people. And also he says when it comes to also black media ownership, they still don't make enough money as compared to white-owned media companies in terms of the ad space. But again, yesterday then we heard from, the Advertising Regulatory Body CEO who made that admission that racism in the sector is a problem. But also, Michelle, what's interesting for me from what he said was that only 0.4% of the complaints that they receive are all about racism and discrimination. So in 2021, for example, they received about 3 complaints.
3 complaints insofar as racism in the industry
and discrimination, that's right. Which is actually quite shocking, if considering the fact that, in the country this is something that is quite massive. And one of the things, though, that she said was that shortly after the Clicks and Tresemme ad debacle, the body, in fact, offered to do workshops for the industry. Only one advertising agency took the board on that.
So that speaks to the will to change things in the industry. I mean, are we to take from what she describes, yesterday, as a lack of will for the industry itself to change?
Well, she says perhaps the industry does not think that it has a problem with racism. Remember, Michelle, she says they cannot force people to attend workshops on this. And if the sector does not see that it has a problem with racism, well, it's their own problems. But of course, one of the biggest problems, though, that the body has is that, its membership is not mandatory, is voluntary, and therefore you cannot compel somebody who's not your member to be part, to adhere perhaps fully to some of the rules and regulations and the guidelines that you have.
It's going to be interesting to hear from the Freedom of Expression Institute today. The other important issue, I suppose, is, and this is a question for the Human Rights Commission, if we're talking about most advertising spend going to white advertising agencies, how do we compel companies, corporates, government organizations? Perhaps it's easier with government organizations. But how do you compel companies to direct their advertising spend to black-owned companies?
It's an important question that, the Human Rights Commission, including the sector itself, needs to answer. And of course, I mean, what Dr. Mbuyiseni was saying, that we need to be honest with ourselves. Each and every company that is operating in this country benefits from a black person. Black South Africans, you and I, have the buying power. And that's why these companies still exist, and therefore the way the advertising industry spends its money needs to make sure that black South Africans, black media owners, benefit in that regard. So today we'll hear from the Freedom of Expression Institute, because there's also been this issue about where do you draw the line between the freedom of expression and also just being wrong and violating the rights of others.
Yeah, incredibly important discussion. Our senior reporter, Malungelo Booi, is tracking those hearings. It's day 3 of those Human Rights Commission's hearings into discrimination and racism in the advertising industry. And of course, we're tracking that.